Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where it's about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Wynonna Earp. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we had the intro where, Waverly, Nicole and Waverly's wedding, and I thought it was like super adorable. Like, obviously, Doc's there, Jeremy's there, Nedley's the one kind of, getting them married, and obviously, Wynonna's walking her down the aisle, and it's just kind of like, oh yeah, sis, and I was like, it's super adorable. But then it's like, oh, Waverly's not going to come. You know why? Because we know what you did, and it's like, go ahead, say it. We want to hear you say it, and she's like, I can't. So that was a whole interesting thing. And then she wakes up from the nightmare because she was coughing. Everyone was coughing, but it turns out the house is on fire. She manages to get Waverly out. I thought it was interesting because the moment, because I thought it was naturally weird because obviously the last time we saw Nicole, like her and, Ma'am, and I was like, why? I was like, she's just laying in bed. I was like, okay, something's up with that. And then so the moment there was a fire and everything, I was like, she's being controlled. Like, she set the fire. I kind of figured as much, like, right from the beginning. But at the same time, there's that conversation between Doc and Wynonna, because it's like, oh yeah, like, Doc doesn't sleep anymore, kind of the perks of him being a vampire now. And it's interesting because Wynonna's like, we haven't really talked about that. And it's like, yeah, like, they obviously there were the issues in season 1, season 3, but they never really talked about it. Like, they've never really had to be fair, they were dealing with the whole Bullshard situation. Now it's like they've never had the time to really talk about everything, like, because obviously they didn't talk as much last season, to a certain extent. But before they could, I thought it was kind of interesting, and I thought that she smelled him, and she was like, did you eat another fireman again? Which I think it's so interesting saying that line, because it's like, well, let's not forget, said fireman was Charlie, who was actually Julian, so he was like your boyfriend, but also he was your sister's bio dad, so it's just kind of an interesting thing, like, you would reference that specifically, but nevertheless, in the grand scheme of things, like, obviously, like, everyone was able to get out of the house, everything was okay. It's like, oh yeah, I love Rachel being like, yeah, like, the couch is going, plus, like, what was it, like, either half or, like, almost all your porn is going too. But luckily everything kind of worked out. And now it's a situation of, like, because Doc is, like, looking at the, like, footprints and stuff like that. The only people that came in were the people that were here. And I even love, like, Rachel being like, what? You saying that because you've memorized all our shoe sizes? And he's like, correct. And she's almost like, okay, impressive. I love that, just being like I did memorize all your shoe sizes. But it's also like, oh, luckily the homestead's made from, like, stubborn wood or whatever, made by stubborn people and stubborn wood or something like that. And Wynonna was like, oh, that's what I used to describe my last boyfriend. And then she was like, that was inappropriate. And Rachel was like, is that because he's dead, or is it because that's Waverly's angel dad? And then like, Wynonna's quiet for a second, and then she's like, both. In grand scheme of things, it's like, obviously they're like, oh, it's obviously had to be the Clantons. They had to be the ones behind all this. And it's interesting, they actually kind of show it ahead of time that Doc is very much like, now let's not kind of jump to, like, going to war about this, because obviously it's like, well, they had that creature, so, like, whoever did this had to be someone supernatural if it's just our footprints here. But it's like the only supernatural we're aware of on their side is that Reaper, that guardian thing of sorts that they have. So they go, like, Doc and Wynonna go visit Eamon, and I love him being like, well, if you want to threaten me, it's like, if you want to hurt me, all you had to do was, like, ask or whatever. And she's like, oh, aren't you nice? And then Doc's almost looking like, what the hell is going on here? And he slides in between them. He's like, no. Because, like, the flirtation back and forth between them, because it's like, oh, they're a scourge. And he was like, so, like, what was it, like, McDuck or Ebenezer type of situation? He was like, no, Scourge, not Scrooge. And she was like, well, what kind of Scrooge are we dealing with? Because it's like, are they revenants? Are they demons? Because the whole question is, like, maybe there's something supernatural. And I loved his line being like, a little less and a little more than all of that. And I was like, that's such an interesting ambiguous response, but the fact of the matter is saying that they're not 100. So it's saying they're not 100% human, but they're not revenants, but they're less than revenants, but they're a little more than demons. I kind of took, or rather, it's just a little, like, they're somewhere in between. So I'm assuming it's like they've got cursed blood. Like, they're not like they come back like revenants, but they do have like demon-like aspects to them. Like, there's a poison. I think there's a curse upon their family, much like the Earp curse, I think it's just kind of like there's something in their bloodline that's tainted. But that was interesting in the grand scheme of things. And obviously, like, he's pouring them drinks, and Wynonna's like, oh, I'm not going to drink that. And then, like, you have Doc just kind of, like, knock it back, because she's almost like, because it's like, oh, because it could have been, like, roofied or something like that, you know? But in the grand scheme of things, Eamon kind of makes it clear, like, oh, he wants to help Wynonna find Peacemaker, because apparently he knows exactly where it is. The reason why he wants to help her is because, oh, you dealing with the Clantons is way better for us, for him, because I thought it was kind of interesting. He was like, oh yeah, the thing about demons, they come in here and they get drunk, which is interesting to think, like, oh yeah, demons can get drunk. That's so interesting. And so they end up kind of like, for him, it's like the Clantons are kind of bad for business. They're bad for him. For him, he's like, oh, I'm never a bottom. And he looks at Doc, he's like, even for you. And then I love Wynonna being like, oh, isn't he like your boss? You should contact HR about that. But nevertheless, it's like, obviously, like, it's kind of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It's like, I'm only aligning with you guys because I want the Clantons, because I almost want to say Claytons. The Clantons, I want them kind of dealt with because they're an issue for me. Now, what that means in the grand schemes for Amon, like, will that be a situation of, oh, you remove them and I become the big player in, you know, the Ghost River Triangle, which they refer to it as the GRT. Like, they've never abbreviated that before, at least not to my recollection. I thought that was it's just a weird little thing of like, oh, they abbreviated it. That's why I was like, when they said it, I was like, GRT, I was like, what? And they said it again, I was like, oh, Ghost River Triangle. I felt so stupid because I was like, they've never abbreviated that before, at least not that I remember. Like, that was, regardless. So now with all that kind of in mind, obviously there's the whole thing with the Clantons, because obviously Ma'am, she's like, oh, you know, Mama Clanton is in a situation where she's wanting to celebrate, because it's like, oh, now it's all kind of come to it. Well, first of all, it's kind of sad. Well, Cleo and Holt ended up getting kicked out because Jeremy's kind of taking over because Black Badge kind of has jurisdiction. And it's like, oh yeah, we kind of run this place now. And I love her being like, oh, what's to stop me from just popping your eyes out and just taking these sunglasses for myself? And it's like, well, because I'm the one that's in charge here. And I even love she breaks one thing. He's like, well, that's one less thing the movers have to take care of. But nevertheless, like, obviously that was kind of their place or whatever. Because obviously Cleo was kind of upset because she's like, aren't you tired? And for him, he's like, yeah, at the end of the day, I actually am tired. Because, like, for him, it's like, it seems like Holt has the most reservation about all this. Like, Cleo seems like she's all about revenge. Last episode, her being the one that sent that creature after Wynonna kind of makes that clear. But it seems like Holt seems like he's the one in the family. Like, Billy seems like the most reserved, but it even seems like Holt's just kind of like, I'm tired because this is such a long blood. He's probably had to grow up his entire life dealing with this, much like Wynonna, like having to deal with the Earp curse. It's like that. Well, because obviously, you know, well, because she was always ostracized as being kind of like, oh, that weird girl who talks about demons and stuff like that. But in the grand scheme of things, I think Holt's kind of like that, where he's just kind of tired of it all. But obviously their mom, you know, she's all about this. Like, they're kind of raised to be all about it too. And she's got her plan and everything. And obviously she's like, when I die, my charm, which I'm assuming that charm has to be whatever it is that gets passed down in their family. Or it's either something specific to her. She's like, it's going to be passed on to one of you, which obviously she's like, I'm scared to think about what you bumbling idiots are going to do if that ends up happening. But for her, it's a thing of like, it almost sounded like she wanted to try and make sure she stayed around. Like, oh, I'm not just going to like kick the bucket. I'm going to make sure, like, almost like, oh, I'm going to find some way to immortalize myself. That's how I took it, but I could have, you know, easily taken it the wrong way. But because while this is all going down, like, we see instances of, you know, Nicole kind of being a little off, like the whole drill situation. It's like, oh, like she can, things kind of seem off in that regard. I thought it was interesting too, speaking of Nicole, like her, when it came to reunited with Jeremy, like Jeremy's like, oh, Nicole. And she's like, yeah, and you couldn't really pick up a phone in all that time. Obviously, it sets up an interesting conversation because, like, obviously he's like, oh no, you know, he's like, I never contacted you because I knew that you could easily handle this, and she's like, yeah, because that's what I did. Once again, it's like Nicole is beating herself down because she feels like she failed not just the team but even Purgatory. She feels like I failed at everything. I couldn't find you guys. I didn't do what I needed to do. You know, it's like the homestead is the only thing that it probably in her mind, it's like that's the only thing I really did. You know. So, obviously, sadly, like I said, this is a season where it just seems like Nicole is like beating herself up a lot about everything because obviously, and it's like obviously, the question comes up about where's Robin? It's like it doesn't matter, he's safe. I'm wondering what that storyline is going to be like. Why, like Jeremy's very much like that. Is Robin being used to keep you in line, type of thing? Or maybe there's something going on with Robin, like with the aftermath of the whole Bullshar situation. Maybe there's something more going on with him, or maybe he's not in a good condition, and Black Badge is the only thing keeping him alive and well. So Jeremy kind of has to work with them because it's in his best interest. Because obviously he made it clear, like, the only reason I didn't contact you, call you on the phone that was being tapped by a Black Badge. For him, it's like, we all did things that we're not proud of just to survive. And obviously that resonates with Nicole a lot because obviously she did something, and it seemed that she actually couldn't remember what she had actually done. It's there subconsciously, but she wasn't aware. Like, I think it's like, she was like, I think more specifically, she didn't remember the price. She remembered she did something, but she couldn't remember what the price was for her doing that. And so obviously she keeps throwing up, like, at first it's like, what's this goop she's throwing up? Oh, it's literal frogs. And it's that type of situation. There's something else that kind of had this recently. I can't remember, not recently. There was something else that had that where someone tried to, if you ever played The Wolf Among Us, there's kind of a curse similar to that. You always say, I'm sorry, but my lips are sealed. Like that's a whole thing. Like it's kind of a curse during the Telltale games, The Wolf Among Us, which is a really good story, by the way. So it kind of reminded me of that. But it was like there's another instance I feel like if someone couldn't say anything because it would trigger vomiting every time. Like I think Doom Patrol. Like yeah, because season 1 I think Mr. Nobody did it to the chief. That every time the chief they asked the chief questions and stuff like that, he would like very heavily vomit or something like that. That's what I think the most recent example of that, what I was thinking of. But regardless, tangents and all that. But she's throwing up frogs. So it's like, okay, so, and once again, it's not just her trying to tell them what happened. She even tried writing it down, but it come out like as scribbles. It's not actually like, she can't write the words out, so it kind of affects her in every regard. But also it is a situation of like, if anyone asks her about it, I think it's like asking a question makes her think about telling you, but she can't, so it just makes you throw up more. And I even love Nedley being like, oh, was it this, or SpongeBob? And she's like, oh, look at you did so much research. She's like, Waverly's like, almost, because he threw in SpongeBob at the end there. I love that SpongeBob's a demon we had to worry about in Ghost River Triangle. But kind of circling back to like Wynonna and Doc, I thought it was interesting, like they have to do the whole finding that painting, and that's supposed to, like, it's going to let whoever has the gun know where to find you. So that's kind of the price, and it's in a museum and everything. And in that museum, Doc is watching, like, this movie is playing. It seems like it's an interview with Wyatt. And I thought it was interesting because, like, this is our first time ever seeing, like, an older Wyatt. Because anytime we've ever seen Wyatt in the past, it was a younger version of him. And I thought it was interesting how, in the grand scheme of things, he said this thing, which I thought was kind of interesting. Basically, it was a conversation about destiny versus fate. Like, I forgot what it was. So interesting because he said something about destiny. He said that fate is what you ends up finding you type of situation. I thought it was kind of interesting. It was basically at the end, he was kind of like, did I at the end of the day have a choice on being like who I am, like the circumstances and everything, like almost kind of like, was it all just kind of predestined? Like, was there ever really a choice in my hand? Was everything always meant to go down the way it did? But what got really interesting is when he brings up, like, I think the OK Corral situation, and Doc's like, wait, what? Because it's like, oh yeah, like that was a loose, that Doc, he was a loose cannon. Why it's like, oh, when he fired the first shot, and Doc is like, I didn't fire the first shot. What the hell is he talking about? And so now it's a situation of he's skewing everything. Like, oh yeah, the reason I pulled Doc off of whatever whore he was on top of, and we took down whoever needed to be taken down. And I thought it was so interesting because, especially for Doc, it rubbed him the wrong way. Because Wynonna's like, oh, older people, they kind of lose their mind a little bit, but they remember things a certain way. But obviously Doc, it rubbed him the wrong way because it's like, I think it was more so a specific situation of like, because in the grand scheme of things, because they Mama Clanton talks about it, like their people at the corral were slaughtered. It's like their family was wiped out in like a minute and a half. And I think for Doc, it's like, for you to make it seem like I'm the one that started that, like we did some terrible shit, don't make it seem like I was the first one to fire. It's like, it's probably like he was following Wyatt's lead. And I thought it was interesting because like Wynonna was like, do you think he'd be proud of me? And Doc is like, I think now, like, I think you might not be so proud of him, because, and then even she later on asked him about it. He's like, we killed a lot of people, it's like, killing innocent people, like, because they slaughtered that family. And she's like, it's the Clantons, they were killing people, robbing people, taking stuff from him. But then he was like, how can we're not really that different from them. We were doing the exact same thing, especially around that, that it was the times. We did the exact same thing. Only difference between us and them, we had a badge. So we kind of had the legal right to it. Because even Wyatt has said, like, oh, he's been called many things, like, basically a hero, a lawman, a murderer. But obviously the whole conversation about, like, all the, like, terrible things they did, like I said, I think that's why it rubbed Doc the wrong way, because especially because it's like taking a story where we just slaughtered people and we kind of got praised as heroes for it. Like for him, he recognizes like how effed up that is. And it's interesting because how this whole thing folds into the whole story about peace and everything like that. Because obviously like they ended up stealing the painting because it's like, oh, what are we going to do this? Like she was kind of wondering like, oh, do I need to put on a suit, kind of like sneak around? And Doc is like, honestly, I really like that. How about we just do this? He grabs a painting and walk away, and those kids are like, you can't just do that. And Wynonna was like, fuck you, we're bouncing. And he just like run out. It's like, oh yeah, they did that. So basically she ends up at that church. It's basically like a whole bunch of nuns, and it's like, what was it? The place of like the scorned woman or something like that. It's basically a place where they're trying to like help people, and obviously Wynonna's like, I'm not really kind of all about like, the habit and stuff like that. But it's like, she's like, we can help you basically almost find peace. Because, because the painting they want isn't just the painting. The painting is revealing where that woman is. And it's like, well, who is this woman? So, the fact of the matter is, Wynonna goes to where Peacemaker is. She can feel Peacemaker, but Peacemaker's not returning to her. And it's like, she's like almost treating Peacemaker like a dog, like, come here right now. Like, what are you doing? Because Peacemaker won't come to her because it's like, my duty's fulfilled. The curse has been broken. There's no more bond between us. But for Wynonna, it's like, no, you can't just up and abandon me. My friends, my family, everyone needs me right now, and I need to protect them. So our work isn't done until I damn it say it's done. Well, gosh, dagnabbit, she said something of the nature of like, oh yeah, like, but it's like, it's not over until I say it's over. But I thought it was interesting because the nun was kind of like, oh, like you could find peace, but for her it's like, how would I even lead a normal life? Why the fuck would I want to? And she ends up expounding upon that later on because she brings it up, like, and she's brought this up before. Being the Earp heir was actually something she was good at. I mean, granted, it took its toll on her in season 1. Like, it's like, regardless of demons or revenants, she is killing people, so that does take its toll on her. But for her, sadly, the thing is, killing people, it's something she's good at. Sadly, it seems like obviously that's kind of like the whole issue. This is all a cycle because obviously Doc is kind of like, we've bloodied our hands to do what we've needed to do, but it's like at the end of the day, it is a situation of like almost this cycle of like, we kind of need to break it, because, neither one of us has really washed our hands of all the blood. Like, but like I said, for Wynonna, it's like this being the Earp heir, doing all this, it's something she's good at. But like I said, it's, the Earp in her that's kind of good at that. Because Doc went to go see, Eamon, and Eamon makes it pretty clear. He's like, oh, obviously I look after myself. I mean, he's like, you understand that because you're all about self-preservation. But Doc was like, don't compare yourself to me. It's like, obviously, it's like, you're a survivor too. That's why you're here right now. But obviously Doc was basically like, you can't stay neutral forever. Like in a war like this, there ain't no neutrality. So at the end of the day, Eamon is probably going to have to choose a side. So... Because obviously for him, it's like, I don't need to choose this. I'm going to stay neutral because at the end of the day, the only person I'm looking after is me. But then, like, Doc sits down with Holt, and it's a whole conversation about like, oh, you snuck in at night and murdered people basically while they were sleeping or whatever. And then it's also the thing of like, well, the history books say one thing and my family say another thing about what went down and everything. So it's like, which one of us deserves a bullet? You or me? Maybe I should let fate decide. But then Doc was like, at the end of the day, us doing everything that we do, like the blood we're going to have to spill in this war is going to damn us all. And I think obviously Doc speaks from that because remember the whole thing from it's a through line for season 2 and 3 was the whole aspect of when Dawes killed him in that what if world that Wynonna didn't exist. Dawes killed him and he went to hell, like, you know. So I think that's where he was kind of speaking from. And obviously, Holt saying like, oh, we have these, for this town full of women who would want us to, kind of fight and kill for them type of situation, because obviously he does it for his mom. Obviously Doc will fight and kill for Wynonna, so like I said, it makes him like seem like, aside from Billy, he seems like the most sympathetic member of the Clantons, so I just thought that was kind of interesting. What I also thought was kind of fascinating though, well, for one, I love like we find out like the painting, it's like, oh yeah, like Nicole was like, oh yeah, that's in what was it called? Was it Steve's whatever? And it's like, oh yeah, because like she had to rescue a guy named Steve and his friend because they got stuck there naked. And you just want to know, it's like, wow, there are just no good men left in this town. But what I thought was interesting is the moment Doc showed up, Nicole started getting sicker. So I was like, wait, like, because obviously like whatever the price may be, we still don't know what it is that, because Nicole was so desperate to find the others, that she made that deal. We don't know what the price was, but she's scared that, like, if it comes out about what that price is that she paid, Waverly might not basically want to marry her. That's been her biggest reservation so far. Like I said, she remembers she made a deal, but she could never remember what it was exactly that she, because at first she was like, there's no way I could have made that deal. So I'm like, but I think it had to have something to do with Doc, because the moment he showed up, she started like gagging, throwing up more. So it seemed like it was in reaction to him. So it has something, it affects all of them, but I think it has some direct correlation with him specifically. Because obviously, like, Jeremy was working on different ways. There's one way that's like, oh, this will help, but you'll turn into like a demon dog or something. She's like, no, I'd rather not, I'm more of a cat person. Jeremy's like, me too. The other one is like, we have to kind of drown you in salt water or something like that. And it's like, yeah, so you basically have to die. And 3, it's basically taking a soup that will turn your intestines into snakes. So obviously they go with option 3. In a grand scheme of things. At the same time, there's also Rachel sneaking around the Clanton's place trying to find Billy. Obviously, we see that he's become one of those things too, but obviously Rachel can't see him, but it's like, I figured that's what they were doing, transforming him into one too. It makes you wonder, is that something that's reversible? Maybe, hopefully it is, because it would kind of be suck if he was kind of stuck in that way. Because obviously it's like, oh, especially because he's going to be the one that, obviously, like, she hasn't set it up for him to go after Rachel or anyone yet, because she would be able to see him if that was her, if she was his target, so, but obviously, Nicole makes the ultimate decision that she, handcuffs Waverly so that she doesn't, get involved, because she wants Jeremy to help her with one of the other ways to kind of deal with this whole, curse situation. Because it's interesting. Well, once again, and it's something like I brought up earlier, it's like Nicole's been carrying this guilt about everything because she feels like she gave up, because like the whole thing was for them to not give up, and she felt like she gave up, because it's like, you guys were going for over a year, and I first I believed that you would come back, but after some time she just lost faith and she gave up, and that's led to whatever this price is that got paid. But then at the same time, there's the whole situation of like, her apologizing to Nedley. It's like, I was trying to kill you for so long. He was like, well, to be fair, I was a monster. She's like, yeah, but I gave up on you too. But she's like, you've always been there for me, and so for me to give up on you like that, I'm so sorry. But I'm basically, she's going to try and make things right. So it's like, I need your help. I need you to kill me. So So what's also interesting too is like the line from Mama Clanton. See, I keep doing that, but Mama Clanton about the whole aspect of like they're going to destroy themselves because I'm assuming whatever secret it is about what price was paid is going to undo the bonds that they've created. Like, and it's not just because it's going to be about probably some of the stuff that Jeremy did while he was away, what he did to survive, once again, it probably correlates to the Robin thing, but also like maybe there's other things that Nicole did that we haven't tackled yet either. It might not just be whatever price she has to pay to the Clantons. It might be something else. But then also Wynonna and Doc end up finding a woman, and lo and behold, who is it? Rosita. I figured as much because they went out of their way to bring Rosita back into the storyline, because she's like, wait, this picture is of Rosita. I wish I still had, she was still around as a Revenant, because she'd be the first one I'd get when I got Peacemaker back. I'd take her out because she tried to steal my baby. But the fact is, she's still around. It's like, you are a Revenant. Like, what happened? You being like the scorned woman and everything. It's like, I'm wondering, because the fact is, that was around the same time they were having a conversation about like Doc shooting the guy that was going to shoot Wyatt in the back. And then what did Wynonna say? She was like, who was it? He was like, I didn't bother learning the person's name, because it's like, why bother learning the name of someone who's willing to shoot another person in the back? Like, they're not worth it. But I'm like, that's got to have significance. And maybe that's also kind of the part of this that you just it kind of plays in that whole thing of like, you never really went about things. I mean, to be fair, it was the literal wild west back then, but also it's just kind of like the way him and Wyatt handled things. It's like, yeah, they did some good, but at the same time, like, I mean, why in particular did Wyatt want to get justice like that? Like, wipe them out like that? Like, I mean, yeah, they did some terrible stuff, but it's still like, why slaughter them the way you did? Like, that's what I'm curious about, especially you being the Slaw Man. But for him, it's like, those are labels other people put on me being a hero and stuff like that. Obviously, once again, he's like, other people call me murderer. So it's like, everyone's expectations and belief in him, and that's obviously, once again, a thing that Doc was trying to get across. So like, you may not like who he was, because all you hear are these heroic tales of him, but much like me, he had his dark side, he had his complicated nature as well, that he did stuff that he wasn't proud of. I sure as hell did stuff I'm not proud of. But I'm assuming Rosita might have something to do with the person that Doc shot that was supposed to be, maybe, because just the fact is that Rosita came up in conversation immediately after that too. That's why I'm like, I don't know, but once again, it's like, why are you still around? No other Revenant is still around, so maybe Rosita's situation's a little different, or maybe because it has something to do with the scorned woman thing. Whatever the case may be, she's the means to the ends of getting Peacemaker back, so that's definitely going to be interesting, considering it's like both of them are there to get her, the woman that tried to steal their baby. They made that whole point, so it's going to be interesting to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. Apparently, the next episode is a mid-season finale. I'd seen that, before the season aired, that there was going to be, a mid-season finale at some point later on down the road, which I thought was interesting, because I'm like, they've never done the mid-season thing before now, so I'm wondering why. I wonder, is it because of everything going down, so is the season not done? And the reason they're doing that, or are there other reasons why? Because I haven't really looked into it. I just thought it was interesting seeing that. But regardless, I'm interested to see what goes down in the mid-season finale. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.